Interpretation of Anuradha Nakshatra. When the moon is placed in Anuradha Nakshatra and supported by benefics like Jupiter or Venus, it gives a deep, emotionally loyal, and structured personality that thrives in committed relationships and spiritual growth. Ruled by Saturn and symbolized by the lotus, growing through hardship, Anuradha carries the Shakti of Radhana Shakti, the power of devotion. A benefic moon here fosters emotional maturity, the ability to lead through cooperation, and inner endurance. When afflicted by Mars, Rahu, or Ketu, the moon in Anuradha may become overly rigid, emotionally guarded, or vulnerable to power struggles masked as devotion. Venus in Anuradha brings beauty into structure, commitment into romance, and grace into discipline. When well placed in Kendra or Kona and supported by Saturn or Jupiter, Venus here offers a loyal, sensual, and emotionally steady partner. It enhances love through patience and dedication. However, if afflicted, especially by Saturn or Rahu, Venus may become cold, manipulative in affection, or entangled in karmic relationships rooted in obligation rather than joy. Jupiter in Anuradha offers the wisdom of patient expansion. When strong, it manifests as spiritual teachers, political reformers, or loyal guides who earn trust through consistent effort. Jupiter's Dharma blends with Saturn's resilience to build powerful ethical legacies. When afflicted, Jupiter here can become overly rigid in belief, overly dependent on control, or dogmatic in emotional and spiritual matters, confusing devotion with domination. Mars in Anuradha transforms its aggression into strategic control and protective loyalty. When well placed, Mars gives disciplined warriors, defenders of truth, or emotionally strong reformers. The native becomes fearless, yet emotionally stable in crisis. However, if afflicted, Mars in Anuradha may lead to power games, covert anger, or a tendency to dominate relationships under the mask of care or leadership. Saturn in Anuradha performs exceptionally well, being its own nakshatra. It grants emotional endurance, spiritual authority, and mastery over delayed gratification. Natives with well-placed Saturn in Anuradha can become karmic guides, spiritual disciplinarians, or committed builders of institutions. However, if afflicted or in difficult houses, Saturn may create emotional repression, chronic solitude, or relationship burdens that feel more like duty than joy. Rahu in Anuradha amplifies the desire for control, status through loyalty, or public power masked by service. When supported by Saturn or Jupiter, Rahu here can create influential leaders, occult practitioners, or reformers who work in shadowed systems, law, politics, research. When afflicted, however, Rahu may distort loyalty into manipulation, control into obsession, and spiritual drive into ego-driven dogma. Ketu in Anuradha brings spiritual withdrawal from material loyalty or structured relationships. If placed well and supported by Saturn, it fosters quiet sages, karmic liberators, or solitary guides who serve from behind the veil. If afflicted, it may create emotional aloofness, difficulty with trust, or subconscious resistance to bonding, rooted in past life pain or broken trust patterns. Mercury in Anuradha fuses intellect with emotional resilience. When supported by benefics, Mercury here creates precise communicators, strategists, or counselors who use words for healing, guidance, or negotiation. It supports research, therapy, or political speech rooted in deep emotional insight. When afflicted, especially by Mars or Rahu, Mercury may become manipulative, cynical, or emotionally distant in communication, using words to maintain control rather than connection. Interpretation of Anuradha Nakshatra, house placement context. When Saturn, the ruler of Anuradha Nakshatra, is placed in a Kendra, 1st, 4th, 7th, 10th, or Kona, 1st, 5th, 9th, Anuradha's themes of loyalty, discipline, and emotional maturity gain stable grounding and long-term manifestation. For example, for Scorpio ascendant, if Saturn rules the 3rd and 4th houses and is placed in the 10th house, and Moon is in Anuradha, the native becomes a consistent performer in public life, respected for loyalty, structure, and work ethic. Anuradha's deep emotional current supports endurance and reliable leadership over time. If Venus is in Anuradha and rules the 1st and 8th houses for Taurus ascendant and is placed in the 5th house Kona, the native radiates attractive emotional depth, devotion in love, and stability in creative or romantic bonds. This placement refines Venus's affection into a loyal, dependable form of love. If further supported by Saturn, this can yield artistic brilliance with restraint, often manifesting in music, design, or emotionally resonant creative expression. When a planet placed in Anuradha has its ruler situated in a house, 6th, 8th, or 12th, Anuradha's loyal and structured nature may carry karmic tension, emotional duty, or past life entanglements. For instance, if Mercury is in Anuradha and rules the 2nd and 5th houses, for Virgo ascendant, but Mercury is placed in the 6th house, the native may be burdened with familial responsibilities or emotional strain in creative pursuits. The native becomes a meticulous communicator, often serving through strategic work, but facing emotional fatigue from obligation-driven expression. Now consider Mars in Anuradha for Cancer ascendant, ruling the 5th and 10th houses, and placed in the 1st house, Kendra. Here, Anuradha's loyalty and Mars's strength combine to form a magnetic, protective presence, one who fights for loved ones and leads with emotional conviction. Mars's placement supports leadership and disciplined action, while the nakshatra offers emotional control and intense drive. If afflicted, however, this can create hidden rage or over-attachment to control in personal relationships. If Jupiter is in Anuradha for Sagittarius ascendant, ruling the 1st and 4th houses and placed in the 8th house, the native becomes a spiritual reformer or teacher, deeply involved in transformative experiences, often behind the scenes. Vishaka's forked energy transitions in Anuradha into emotional loyalty and secretive power. Here, Jupiter may guide others through crisis, death-related topics, or hidden wisdom. If afflicted, though, this placement may cause suppressed idealism or disillusionment in emotional partnerships. Suppose Rahu is in Anuradha for Aquarius ascendant, and Saturn is placed in the 7th house, ruling the 1st and 12th houses. The native may be driven to form strategic relationships with powerful partners, often with a desire for emotional control or political elevation. Anuradha's devotion is channeled through Rahu's ambition, leading to karmic partnerships that teach detachment, trust, and the limits of control. If Saturn is strong, this person can become a powerful negotiator or social reformer. If weak, it could lead to emotional betrayal or manipulation in personal alliances. If Ketu is in Anuradha and Saturn is placed in the 9th house, for Pisces ascendant, the native may feel emotionally detached from religion, tradition, or mentors. Anuradha's desire for loyalty becomes tested in spiritual life, possibly rejecting dogma for direct spiritual experience. If well-placed, Ketu here grants inner devotion, independence in belief, or guidance from unconventional paths. If afflicted, it may bring distrust in authority, isolation, or spiritual confusion. Finally, if the moon is in Anuradha for Leo ascendant and rules the 12th house, placed in the 4th house, the native carries a deep inner emotional world, often directed towards spiritual practices, caregiving, or ancestral healing. Anuradha's depth here expresses as strong inner peace, emotional intelligence, or intuitive leadership. However, if the moon is afflicted, this can manifest as emotional suppression, chronic inner guilt, or a burdened sense of responsibility within the home or family lineage. Interpretation of Pushya Nakshatra. When the moon is placed in Pushya Nakshatra and supported by benefics like Jupiter or Venus, it gives rise to a calm, nurturing, and spiritually mature emotional nature. Ruled by Saturn and symbolized by the udder of a cow, Pushya stands for nourishment, protection, and disciplined devotion. A benefic moon in Pushya creates compassionate caretakers, individuals with a deep urge to uplift, heal, and serve others. However, when the moon is afflicted by Rahu, Saturn, or Ketu, it can cause emotional rigidity, over-responsibility, or a tendency to suppress one's own needs, while nurturing others excessively. Venus in Pushya blends the qualities of love and duty, creating a persona that expresses affection through quiet acts of support and stability. When placed in Kendra or Kona and supported by Jupiter, Venus in Pushya produces refined caretakers, individuals who express love through constancy, discipline, and beauty rooted in functionality. However, when Venus is afflicted or placed in difficult houses, it can lead to suppressed desires, cold relationships, or conflict between duty and pleasure. Jupiter placed in Pushya is exceptionally auspicious. This is considered one of Jupiter's most favored nakshatras. Its sattvic energy resonates well with Pushya's desire to protect and uphold dharma. A well-placed Jupiter in Pushya gives rise to spiritual teachers, counselors, or philanthropic figures. If afflicted, however, Jupiter may become over-controlling, moralistic, or emotionally distant, struggling to allow vulnerability while clinging to a sense of moral superiority. Mars in Pushya takes on a more controlled, protective force. When well-placed, Mars here acts as a disciplined warrior, someone who defends the weak, works tirelessly for a cause, or channels aggression into structured goals. The influence of Saturn's rulership tempers Mars's impulsivity. However, if afflicted or placed in Dashtana houses, Mars in Pushya may cause emotional suppression, misplaced aggression, or difficulty expressing anger constructively. Saturn in its own nakshatra functions with deep authority and restraint. In strength, it produces responsible leaders, patient healers, and karmic nurturers who sacrifice personal desires for the greater good. Saturn's natural affinity for Pushya enhances stability and long-term vision. However, when Saturn is weak or afflicted, the native may experience emotional burden, excessive detachment, or the inability to receive care, always giving, never replenished. Rahu in Pushya exaggerates the need to nurture or be seen as a helper. In strength and with support from Jupiter or Mercury, Rahu and Pushya can produce influential figures in social work, education, or healing professions, especially through unconventional methods. However, afflicted Rahu can distort Pushya's purity, manifesting as martyrdom complexes, emotional codependency, or manipulative caregiving masked as love. Ketu in Pushya brings past life samskaras around duty, service, and emotional withdrawal. When Ketu is well-placed and supported by Saturn or Jupiter, the native may act as a renunciate, spiritual guide, or emotionally detached yet wise protector. But under affliction, Ketu and Pushya may cause emotional numbness, fear of dependence, or rejection of nurturing altogether, struggling to receive the love it effortlessly offers. Mercury in Pushya becomes a mindful communicator, especially when supported by Venus or Jupiter. It excels in speech, writing, or negotiations related to healing, food, security, or family structures. A well-placed Mercury here produces mental discipline, practical intelligence, and a soothing voice. If afflicted, however, Mercury in Pushya may become overly analytical, emotionally restrained in speech, or struggle to express deeper feelings, turning nurturing into a transactional or mechanical process. Interpretation of Pushya Nakshatra house placement context. When Saturn, the ruler of Pushya Nakshatra, is placed in a Kendra 1st, 4th, 7th, 10th, or Kona 1st, 5th, 9th. Pushya's stabilizing, nurturing, and spiritually disciplined qualities manifest with strength and visibility. For example, for Cancer ascendant, if Saturn rules the 7th and 8th houses, and is placed in the 10th house, and Moon is in Pushya, the native becomes a provider or guardian figure in the public realm, known for resilience, integrity, and service-driven leadership. Pushya's protection theme plays out in career roles involving responsibility, such as governance, caregiving, or institution building. If Venus is placed in Pushya and rules the 5th and 10th houses, for Capricorn ascendant, and Venus is positioned in the 9th house, Kona, the native's nurturing energy expresses through higher learning, cultural values, or artistic philosophy. Venus in Pushya in a trinal house bestows a graceful, spiritually inspired ability to comfort and support others, often through teaching, mentoring, or aesthetic refinement anchored in tradition. When the lord of a planet placed in Pushya resides in a Dushtana house, 6th, 8th, or 12th, the nurturing quality of Pushya may turn burdensome or karmically complex. Suppose Mercury is in Pushya and rules the 2nd and 5th houses for Virgo ascendant, but Mercury is placed in the 8th house. The native may have karmic challenges involving communication within the family or with children, possibly needing to heal inherited emotional patterns. Pushya's nourishing nature here may feel blocked or delayed, especially in expressing care through words or creativity. Now consider Jupiter in Pushya for Libra ascendant, ruling the 3rd and 6th houses, and placed in the 4th house, Kendra. The native becomes emotionally wise and generous at home or in caregiving professions. Pushya's lunar influence is amplified in the 4th house of emotional roots, and Jupiter grants spiritual optimism and inner peace. This placement favors teaching, psychology, or hospitality-based vocations grounded in service and gentle authority. If Mars is in Pushya and rules the first and eighth houses for Scorpio ascendant and is placed in the fifth house, Kona, the native may act as a disciplined mentor, coach, or creative protector. Mars channels its fire into constructive expression, especially in matters of education, children, or creativity. Pushya softens Mars's aggression and steers it into uplifting action, giving rise to bold yet emotionally rooted initiatives. Suppose Rahu is in Pushya and Saturn is placed in the 12th house for Aries ascendant. The native may have a deep inner drive to serve or sacrifice for others, yet feel emotionally exiled or burdened. The 12th house often indicates hidden karma or foreign environments, so Pushya's nurturing may manifest through behind-the-scenes roles or spiritual isolation. When supported by Jupiter or Venus, Rahu and Pushya here may result in impactful work in NGOs, healing, or spiritual guidance. If Ketu is in Pushya for Taurus ascendant and Saturn is in the first house, the native may carry an old soul quality, detached from worldly needs, but still compelled to protect or support others. With Saturn in the ascendant, there is a karmic identity built around responsibility and steadiness. Ketu in Pushya makes the native inwardly detached from emotional dependency, but externally perceived as deeply supportive or spiritually mature. Finally, if the moon is in Pushya for Gemini ascendant and rules the second house, and is placed in the seventh house, the native seeks emotional partnerships rooted in nourishment, loyalty, and security. Pushya's healing grace manifests in relationship patterns, where the native often plays the role of the emotional anchor. When well placed, this moon produces comforting, dependable partners. When afflicted, it may attract emotionally needy dynamics that force the native to mature in love and emotional reciprocity. Interpretation of Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra. When the moon is placed in Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra and supported by benefics like Saturn, its ruler, or Jupiter, it brings depth, stability, and spiritual maturity to the emotional body. Ruled by Saturn and symbolized by the back legs of a funeral cot or a serpent in deep sleep, this nakshatra holds the Shakti of bringing rain, the power to nourish through stillness. A benefic moon here grants emotional endurance, mystical insight, and compassion anchored in detachment. When afflicted, especially by Rahu, Mars, or Ketu, it may cause emotional suppression, guilt, or delayed inner development due to karmic weight. Venus in Uttara Bhadrapada refines devotion into selfless love or spiritual artistry. When supported by Saturn or Jupiter, it gives emotionally reserved lovers, healers, or poets who value soul-level connection over fleeting pleasure. Venus here beautifies introspection. If afflicted, however, it may express as unfulfilled romantic longing, repressed sensuality, or over-sacrificing tendencies in relationships. Jupiter in Uttara Bhadrapada brings depth to belief systems and dharma. It produces wise counselors, spiritual educators, or elders who carry cosmic knowledge with emotional grace. When well placed, Jupiter here nurtures the emotional need for truth, service, and quiet evolution. If afflicted, Jupiter's optimism can become burdened by emotional heaviness or self-righteous inertia in the name of compassion. Mars in Uttara Bhadrapada channels assertiveness inward, driving the native toward internal transformation, disciplined rituals, or esoteric pursuits. When supported, Mars gives yogic warriors, silent protectors, or seekers who burn impurities through effort. When afflicted, especially by Ketu, it may lead to emotional exhaustion, passive aggression, or repressed rage masked by calm exterior. Saturn in Uttara Bhadrapada reinforces endurance, responsibility, and karmic emotional processing. When dignified, this Saturn gives grounded mystics, disciplined monks, or wise karmic administrators. These natives bear pain with patience and lead through silent service. If afflicted, it may manifest as emotional detachment, loneliness, or burdens passed down through ancestral memory. Rahu in Uttara Bhadrapada intensifies the desire for spiritual relevance, mystical identity, or emotional transcendence. A supported Rahu brings psychological depth, innovative spiritual perspectives, or charisma in the healing arts. When afflicted, it may distort detachment into escapism, emotional aloofness into manipulation, or create confusion around spiritual authority. Ketu in Uttara Bhadrapada completes old spiritual debts, detaching the native from egoic emotion. It may grant profound intuitive perception, emotional neutrality, or unconscious memory of past lives. If well placed, Ketu allows the native to serve without attachment. If afflicted, however, it can result in emotional numbness, chronic disconnection, or reluctance to engage in worldly relationships. Mercury in Uttara Bhadrapada gives intellectual gravity, philosophical speech, and emotionally quiet communication. The native may write or speak about life, death, and liberation with understated power. If supported, Mercury here gives deeply insightful counselors, astrologers, or spiritual communicators. When afflicted, especially by Saturn or Rahu, speech may become cold, overly serious, or clouded by karmic fears, limiting emotional openness in conversation. Interpretation of Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra, house placement context. When Saturn, the ruler of Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra, is placed in a Kendra, 1st, 4th, 7th, 10th, or Kona, 1st, 5th, 9th, the native's emotional body becomes a vessel of calm endurance, karmic maturity, and spiritual responsibility. For Pisces ascendant, if Saturn rules the 11th and 12th houses and is placed in the 9th house, and the moon is in Uttara Bhadrapada, the native becomes a subdued yet profound spiritual seeker, someone who serves elders, traditions, and philosophies through silence, solitude, and sacrifice. Emotional security is tied to dharmic purpose and inner vision. If Saturn is supported by Jupiter, this gives noble renunciation. If afflicted, it may bring a heavy sense of guilt, detachment from family, or karmic resistance to belief systems. If Venus is in Uttara Bhadrapada and rules the 3rd and 8th houses for Sagittarius ascendant and is placed in the 5th house, Kona, the native's creativity becomes infused with quiet longing, spiritual eros, or devotion to transformation. This placement gives emotionally deep lovers or artists who channel repressed emotions into symbolic expression. If Venus is supported by Jupiter or Saturn, it grants refined wisdom and creative communication. If afflicted, it may indicate grief expressed through obsessive romance, hidden pain, or emotional volatility masked by charm. When a planet in Uttara Bhadrapada has its ruler, Saturn, placed in a Dushtana house, 6th, 8th, or 12th, the emotional development often comes through karmic trials, hidden suffering, or long-term solitude. For instance, if Mercury is in Uttara Bhadrapada and rules the 4th and 7th houses for Gemini ascendant, but Saturn is placed in the 6th house, the native may carry emotional burdens related to marriage, home life, or communication breakdowns. However, this placement also makes strong counselors, karmic partners, or deep thinkers who serve others through mental refinement and humility. If supported by Moon or Jupiter, it results in deep wisdom earned through trials. Consider Mars in Uttara Bhadrapada for Aries ascendant, ruling the 1st and 8th houses, and placed in the 12th house. This placement signifies a spiritual warrior, someone who burns through ego and fear in solitude. Emotional drive is expressed through yogic discipline, research, or isolated service. If Mars is well placed, the native may become a transformative teacher or silent healer. If afflicted, however, they may suppress desires until they erupt through unconscious channels or physical fatigue. If Jupiter is in Uttara Bhadrapada and rules the 1st and 10th houses for Pisces ascendant and is placed in the 4th house, Kendra, the native seeks emotional roots in spiritual truth, ethical legacy, or family dharma. They may be seen as a wise parent or protector of ancient knowledge. This placement grants emotional serenity and the ability to nurture others through profound presence. If afflicted, it can lead to emotional rigidity, high moral expectations, or guilt around unmet inner ideals. Suppose Rahu is in Uttara Bhadrapada for Leo ascendant, and Saturn is in the 3rd house. The native desires to communicate higher truths, mystical insight, or hidden teachings, yet may feel emotionally blocked or misunderstood by siblings, peers, or early environment. Rahu energizes the soul's yearning to go beyond form. If Saturn supports, this gives mystical communicators or silent revolutionaries. If afflicted, it can result in confused speech, emotional distrust, or alienation from community. If Ketu is in Uttara Bhadrapada and Saturn is in the 2nd house for Aquarius ascendant, the native detaches from material attachments, family validation, or inherited speech patterns. The emotional theme here is one of silent renunciation, often accompanied by deep intuitive gifts. If supported by Jupiter or Moon, this gives soft-spoken healers or poetic mystics. If afflicted, the native may struggle with speech suppression, karmic guilt, or difficulty connecting emotionally within family structures. Finally, if the moon is in Uttara Bhadrapada for Capricorn ascendant and rules the 7th house, placed in the 3rd house, the native is emotionally expressive through written or spoken word, often carrying karmic insights into relationships. They may feel emotionally calm but inwardly intense, especially in how they bond with partners. If supported, this gives writers, counselors, or quiet guides. If afflicted, it can result in emotional overthinking, repressed grief, or inability to communicate intimate feelings effectively.